Israel obviously must do everything necessary to protect itself. And I feel that often it's misunderstood in the United States because for Washington, Iranian nuclear weapons are a strategic question. For Israel, Iranian nuclear weapons are an existential question. And that is profoundly different. Now, certainly the United States and Israel have a common interest in preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear warheads that can strike Israel. But it's even bigger than that for the United States, because although we identify with Israel, we must. Nonetheless, let us suppose that the Iranians were not going to attack Israel. A dangerous supposition, of course. But even if Israel weren't in the equation, Iranian nuclear weapons give the madmen, the fanatics in Tehran, de facto hegemony, strategic control of the Persian Gulf and all of its oil supplies and infrastructure, the cockpit of the world's energy now and for decades to come in the future. And Iran would have that control without firing a shot just by possessing nuclear weapons. So I try to bring home to Americans that our self-interest is with Israel because it's part of our civilization. And that is not politically correct to say, because we are supposed to pretend that all civilizations are equal, but they are not. Western civilization, Judeo-Christian civilization, triumphed for a variety of reasons, not least because it is the most humane and decent in history. But to go back to the immediate military issues at hand, my fear is that strategic circumstances will force Israel to act unilaterally. And as brave and capable as the IDF is, frankly, the IDF has the power to start a fight with Iran. It does not have the power to finish it. I don't know. I hope that the relationship between our president and Netanyahu is getting stronger every day. It should be. But President Obama has had to overcome a tremendous amount of naivete about how the real world works. He came out of a very left-wing milieu, left-wing in a negative sense, in the Southside Chicago community, which has a deep trace of anti-Semitism. He believed the liberation propaganda about Arabs are good, Israelis are oppressors, etc. And he came to office with a messianic sense that he was going to rescue the Middle East and the Palestinians, and then bang, he met reality. And suddenly the Palestinians weren't as reasonable as he thought. The Arab world didn't behave the way he expected them to behave. His charm didn't work. So I think he is becoming more sober, but I still do not believe he has the strategic depth, the background, or the vital instincts of insight to really grasp the complexity of what's going on in the Middle East right now. For example, Syria is a multi-layered, multi-sided conflict that Americans just do not understand. And also, as I tell people with strategy is not merely about doing the right thing. It's about doing the right thing at the right time. And I'm frankly concerned that President Obama may, for various reasons, leap into the Syrian conflict now that it's too late. There was a chance in the first year to support the more secular, more moderate elements among the rebels. But as the struggle grew on, it became more bitter, more protracted. The ethnic lines hardened, the religious lines hardened. And now, who do you choose in that fight? Do you choose Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, Jabhat al-Nusra, or do you choose Assad? It's a devil's own choice. And I always feel that when you don't understand what a fight is about, stay out of it. So my bottom line on this is, if Syria is not disturbing, it's not threatening Israel, and Israel can take care of Hezbollah itself, if it's not threatening our vital interests, we've missed the chance to intervene constructively. Now I think we need to stand back and watch and wait, because it's not just Syria anymore. It's Iran, it's Qatar, it's Saudi Arabia, it's the Turks, it's Hezbollah, it's Hamas, it's Sunni versus Shia, with the minorities caught in the middle. Again, it's so multifaceted and so complex that it's not only hard to see how it can end well, it's hard to see how it can end. But at the end of the day, it's not just about Syria. This is a great Arab and Muslim civil war fought for the future of the entire Middle East outside of Israel. And the consequences of getting it wrong will reverberate for generations. So the bottom line here is it may be necessary to do what we can to contain problems, but ultimately for the Arabs to sort out their own problems. I have no good answers because there are no good answers to this. In the autumn of 2001, after 9/11 and the attacks on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, we did absolutely the right thing. We went to Afghanistan, hammered al-Qaeda, punished the Taliban for hosting them, and then we made a mistake. We stayed. American idealism and naivety combined to lead us into the fool's errand of trying to convince some of the most primitive and backward, superstitious, and bigoted people in the world to become Americans, or at least third-rate Americans. And as I always tell people who wax on about counterinsurgency theory, you cannot make people want what they do not want. It's like, to put it colloquially, look, you can buy sex, but you can't buy love. You can get the Afghans for a certain sum of money to be nice to you for a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a couple of years. But at the end of the day, Afghans want profoundly different things. Not all men and women want the same things. If they did, Afghans wouldn't butcher their daughters over imaginary infractions. They wouldn't keep their wives essentially in purdah. And one could go on and on. But I think America now has to avoid going to the other extreme and refusing to engage. Americans have trouble with balance. They have trouble finding the middle ground that makes sense. So I think we've never had an Afghanistan problem. We've had a Pakistan problem. We've had an Iranian problem. And so when I look at Afghanistan, I see a tragedy of good intentions. And we just got it wrong. A question: which America are you talking about? The Americans where I come from, in the hard-working coal towns of Pennsylvania, definitely understand. They want to kill terrorists. They know this is a fight, it's a knife fight to the death. The problem is that America's elite has lived in such safety, with such wealth and comfort for so long, that they've become to believe the propaganda of the campus, that all cultures are equal, all civilizations are equal, all religions are equal. And that's not the facts of history. Those aren't the realities on the ground. And so I see a tremendous divergence between my America, the Americans who joined the military, the Americans who love their country and will defend it, and the governing elite, which is inbred, not nearly as sophisticated as it thinks, and frankly cowardly in the face of violence. And it's a difficult problem, because when you have weak leaders, it hardly matters how brave and bold the population is. So it troubles me deeply. The American people get it, America's leaders don't. I think Israel has lost something very important over the last half century. It's lost a sense of creative propaganda. And I mean that in a very positive sense. Now, I was raised a Methodist in small-town America. Where I came from, in my town, Catholics didn't even marry Protestants. Jews are people off in the county seat. They owned furniture stores and clothing stores, and they were exotic. And this was in the 1950s. But Israel did something brilliant. It found Leon Uris. It helped him write the book Exodus. Hollywood made it into a film with Paul Newman as Ari Ben Canaan, the Haganah hero. And that movie came to small-town America. As a child, I think I was probably 6 years old when my mother took me to see it. And that was Israel. And Blonde Tuesday Weld and stuff like that. And you can laugh about it. But that film and the book had a tremendous positive impact on people who knew virtually nothing about Israel, who had never met a Jew in their life, and suddenly it was not only real, but it was vital and vibrant. Now, obviously you cannot get away with something quite as naive as that today, but what is the equivalent for the year 2013 or 2014? Israel today makes some wonderful movies, but they're small movies, introspective. Where is the great narrative? I would love to see a television miniseries made by Hollywood and with American funding, talking about a miniseries, what it's like to live in Israel today, from the top to the bottom, when the rockets come down, but also the high tech, the family side. There's a great miniseries there. I'm not pushing one idea. I'm using this as an example. But Israel has to relearn how to sell itself, and it cannot rely solely on American Jews. It must reach out to the greater American population, because they're the ones that vote and decide the elections. American Jewish support for Israel is absolutely vital, indispensable, but you've got to go farther. And Israel cannot surrender the high ground of the narrative to people who hate Israel, or people who are guilt-ridden and crazy and romanticized terrorists. You've got to, and I saw this in person when I was at Kibbutz Sasa in 2006, covering the fighting there. The public affairs officers were very polite to me, but they weren't really interested in somebody who was writing for the New York Post, of all things. They were focused inwardly on Haaretz and everything else. But, there I was. I'm pro-Israel as American can get. I'm going to write for the New York Post, one of the 5 largest newspapers in the United States. And I'm sort of like, well, ho-hum. Israel has to get back in the media fight. I use the word propaganda. It's been devalued, demeaned. But it's just got to get back in the information fight, in the narrative fight. Tell Israel's story today. We've heard the creation story. It's wonderful. But tell us about Israel today and why it is so vital and vibrant and noble.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.